Well, hello there. Come, join me and partake in a top 10 video that you'll most definitely disagree with to some extent. But isn't that the beauty of these videos? We can express our different opinions and nobody gets mad. Yeah, alright. So for those who don't understand the lore here, the last time I did a top 10 for this game was 2 years ago. Elden Ring was merely a month old, an infant. I only played for a few weeks, ran a handful of playthroughs without much thought behind it. Now, a couple years later, after so many challenge runs, after the DLC has been out for a few months, I think it's time to revisit this list. I should warn you though, opinions are truly a toxic topic on the internet. If you're offended by my list, touch grass. I don't care. Anyways, you know what I'm about. You know what top 10s are. So without further ado, my name is Josh, also known as Gorguinni, and I hope you enjoy. You know, I would have never expected this a couple years ago. I'm sure some of you are surprised as well. Yeah, Godric the Grafted is a really good boss, and he's the number 10 spot on my list. In a game with ridiculous boss fights that are sometimes borderline overwhelming, Godric the Grafted is one of the fairest in Elden Ring. Fair, yet super fun. He's an excellent beginner boss that really harbors that feel of Elden Ring overall. When I think of Elden Ring, I think of Godric. Margit is the first boss to essentially be a roadblock and encourage exploration. Once you've done that, the real test is against Godric. He's your main gate that unlocks the rest of the game in terms of difficulty. He's very easy now, even on my first playthrough he didn't really take that many tries, but I still love this fight. You would think that difficulty equals better boss, but I mean, not really. He has simple combos, reasonable damage, yet as early as he is, his second phase was a shock and a half. Godric's second phase transition was, again, a highlight for my first playthrough. Grafting the head of a dead dragon to wield as a flamethrower is pure genius. Not only new attacks, but enhancing old ones too. It's a neat buff that is very unique to the series overall. He might be pathetic lore-wise, but as a boss, he provides an early, unforgettable experience. Up next is none other than Dragon Lord Placidus X. After all my fights against this behemoth, I still love this boss. Cinematic is an understatement. I mean, the fight starts with him floating in the air. That is pure aura, as the kids say. My opinion about Placidus X hasn't really changed for the past 2 years. It's more so been overshadowed by better bosses. Really, it's the cinematic part that keeps Dragonlord on this list entirely. I mean, I like the fight, don't get me wrong, but in the grand scheme of this list, it's not his patterns or his difficulty that I praise him for. It's how fantastic the fight looks. Sometimes it's hard to appreciate a boss's design or aesthetic mid-fight, but Dragonlord is not that intense anymore, so I can observe his beauty as I beat him with a giant stick or magic from afar. Still, he packs a punch no matter how many times you've run through this game. It's not about fast combos or overwhelming the player, it's about being perfect here. One hit and you're either dead or close to it. Every attack holds weight to it, and I like that. Also his design, I mean, who wouldn't like a dual-headed dragon that can teleport, use lightning as claws, or nuke the entire arena? I haven't met anyone thus far that doesn't like that. He's a classic boss in Elden Ring that has stood the test of time 2 years later. The design of a boss is very important to me. You could be one of the most engaging, challenging boss fights, but if your design is doo-doo, then I'm not gonna really like it. Within the DLC, we got so many great designs, we got an amalgamation of fingers, a disproportionate guy, but my favorite is definitely, without question, the Putrescent Knight. I'm still hoping for a Bloodborne sequel. I guess Sony doesn't like money, but you know what? This works for now. The Putrescent Knight is one of those bosses that I like just because I do. He doesn't necessarily stand out from the rest of the bosses in terms of gameplay. He's actually one of the easiest fights in the DLC, which doesn't mean he's easy, but there are obvious windows of opportunity once you know what you're looking for. Out of all the bosses in Elden Ring, the Putrescent Knight had the greatest night and day realizations in my experience. Really, the hardest part for me was figuring out what was an attack and what was him just running around. His weird animations confused me. I didn't really know if he was starting a combo or simply resetting his position. His second phase throws in a couple of curveballs. He now uses this ooze that can inflict frostbite. This would be dangerous, except I can jump in this game. And I like that, by the way. There are bosses in this game that actually utilize the jumping mechanic as a dodge. It's very obvious, like Godfrey, for example. So, you know, I like that. I don't know, man. Can I just say I like a boss just because I do? I just think he's cool. I love the design, I like the fight. Next boss. Unlike P. Diddy, Moog, Lord of Blood, has beaten the allegations and is still one of my all-time favorite bosses. This has been the plot twist of the century. I actually can't believe it. Miquella planned for Moog to use him. You know what? We're not gonna get into it. You can disagree if you want to be wrong, but Moog's theme is the best in the entire game. The evil choir chanting at me while I beat his evil face in is just majestic. After a couple of years, this fight is nothing but a pit stop at this point, but it's like Wawa, you know? I love stopping at Wawa on long trips. I like their smoothies, and their prices are reasonable. Moog is not difficult, but it's still satisfying to dodge all of his attacks and ignore the ritual just to make the fight harder on myself. As I said in my last top 10, the second phase buffs are my favorite part about this fight. The blood flames on his trident add a sort of landmine element to the fight. If you don't want to bleed to death, avoid the flames on the ground. He can also splash this blood flame around with his attacks now, adding an additional hitbox and increasing his range. Like, it's such a great idea. I like it when bosses buff up their previous attacks so that it becomes a threat all over again. It's not too demanding to adjust to, but can still be dangerous if you're not careful. I also think the build up to a fight is very important. You travel through this blood-soaked kingdom, repulsed by all you see. The king who rules over this land is just as grotesque. Moog's palace was a hidden area that really opened my eyes to the creativity of this game. His design is just immaculate. I love the lore behind the omens, and unlike his brother Morgoth, he chose to accept his curse and turn it into a horrendous blessing. Moog is truly one of the best secret bosses in the entire game, and now is an important element to accessing the DLC. One of the most stellar cutscenes in the entire game, Malekith the Black Blade, is still one of my favorite bosses in Elden Ring. He definitely would be higher if it wasn't for the first phase. The Beast Clergyman isn't terrible, it's just not good. As I've mentioned before, one of my favorite aspects about Malekith is his fighting style. He's not simply a beast that uses a sword like Sif from Dark Souls 1. He has a unique fighting style as a quadrupedal beast with a giant weapon. We've seen swordsmen before, we've seen giants before, we've seen dragons before. What we haven't seen is Malekith. He has very distinct, unique animations that are beyond impressive. Seeing him fight is half the enjoyment. The other half is mastering it. I'll admit, his anime of 1,000 Blades was the bane of my existence for a long time. I figured it out eventually. When I made my last top 10, I had no idea how to dodge it, but now I do, and I've never had more fun with dodging a boss's attack before. There is something majestic about this fight that I can't really explain. Perhaps it's the location at the top of a floating arena trapped in time. Maybe it's the significance of Malekith's lore as Marika's shadow and the keeper of the Rune of Death. Or it could be the soundtrack. Elden Ring does have a great soundtrack, yet it wasn't as impactful for me as previous games, but Malekith's was a rare gem. I think it's just a combination of all the above. Malekith without the first phase would be near perfect, which adds much more praise to the next top 5. Alright, let's get the most controversial one out of the way. Promised consort Redon slithers his way into the top 5. It may seem like I'm jabbing this boss below the belt here, and that's because he roughly took me 7 hours to defeat for the first time. Promised consort Redon was like a seesaw on this list. At first, I didn't even want to include him on this list. I thought, I don't really care. On the other hand, I wanted to put him near the top 3, so I decided right down the middle would work for me. You don't need me to explain the why or what behind this boss. You've heard and probably experienced the sheer ball-busting combos and light shows. What I want to talk about is my personal experience and how my perspective changed. At first, I didn't like this duo. The Lothric Princes 2.0 I thought were too much. And from a mechanical standpoint, they are. We have less than the necessary tools to appropriately keep up with this boss. But I guess that's the point. Redon and Miquella are the pinnacle of testing the limits of this game's mechanics. If you ask me, they cannot go any further with this. They'll either tone it down a bit with the next game, or revamp the gameplay entirely. I'll give them praise for crossing that line though. It's a dangerous line to cross because you know how serious we take our games. And many people were not happy about it. YouTube videos, Reddit threads, Instagram, TikTok, everyone was complaining about it. You wanna know what I think? I think this boss is alright, hence why it's in my top 10. I think once you understand the mechanics, it's really not that bad. You're simply limited on where and how to dodge, but once you know that dodging inward is the best and only way, you can take advantage of that. He does have his infamous quote-unquote unfair move, the illusion rushes that leads into a rave light show. I understand that may be annoying to deal with, and it is, but I would argue that this game provides more than enough resources to deal with it easily. I even beat the game without dodging using the busted thrusting shields, link below if you want to watch that. But when I realized that this boss was manageable, I actually had a really fun time. My only real complaint is, ironically, these bosses and their lore. I would have much preferred fighting someone entirely new than Redon again. Like, I get it from a story perspective, but you could have done something different. Miquella's cool though, I like the way they implemented Miquella into this fight. But, you know, Redon, just give us something different. I know a lot of people wanted Godwin, and I did too, but from a lore perspective, it would be very difficult to bring him back. Regardless, Promised Consort Redon left an impression that'll definitely last for quite a while. Now, take everything I said about Dragon Lord Placidusax, but better. That's how I feel about Bale the Dread. My main issue here is that the camera work needs work. Seriously, 4 games later and giant bosses are still the bane of anyone's playthrough. At least mine. These type of games are just not meant to fight giant creatures like this, or at least have the camera zoom out appropriately. Like, Lords of the Fallen did this very well, and I don't understand why they can't just do this for giant bosses. I don't get it. Negatives aside, this boss is a phenomenal encounter. It was easily one of the biggest highlights during the entire DLC. Climbing Jagged Peak, seeing the lightning become more fierce as you reach the top, and once you do, you're greeted by a giant dragon crashing into a large flat arena. Bale's cinematography is unmatched. His second phase is pure eye candy, and yet the gameplay is still very intense, in all the right ways. See, I might step on some toes here, but most dragons in this game are so boring. At least the open world ones. You either are fighting their feet, wings, or their tail. Very rarely do we get a dragon that's hyper aggressive and still leaves his face open for attacks. This is why I like Bale. Seeing him spread his wings for the first time too was amazing. This is a great example of putting in a grand cutscene without putting a stop to the fight entirely. It deserves a cutscene, but I think it's much more impactful when it comes out mid-combat. And how could I forget about Aigon?
Curse you, Bale!
He is the cherry on top for this experience. This is the only boss in the entire series where I feel like summoning help is necessary. Also the soundtrack, glorious. I don't like everything about this boss, besides the camera, but everything else, great. Bale is easily the best dragon boss in Elden Ring.
My purpose standeth unchanged.
Can I just say, out of all the cutscenes in this game, Mesmer's is my absolute favorite. His demeanor and importance to the story is far superior than most bosses in the DLC. I would argue even more than Redon and Miquella. I know this is Miquella's story, but Mesmer steals the show here. For me, he's like Mario in all of his sports games, balanced and well done in every category. I really can't say a bad thing about Mesmer. I guess my only con would be a better second phase. I was hoping for a huge curveball like a dragon-like form or something that would shock us visually speaking. As it stands, I like the second phase, but I wish there was more to him as the main mascot for the DLC hype. Either way, Mesmer the Impaler is a phenomenal boss. My favorite part about him, actually, is his lore and the way it's implemented into the fight. He's one of the few characters in the entire series that really stood out to me. As a son of Queen Marika, so was he too born with a curse, the Abyssal Serpent. Marika silenced the serpent's influence by removing one of Mesmer's eyes, and replacing it with a Charm of Grace. He was tasked by Marika long before the Shattering to purge the land of shadow of those who dwelled in the tower, those who did not bear the light of grace. These were the Hornsent. He would purge their lands using his own malicious fire, which he so despised. No matter what he did, the fire could not be extinguished. And so he uses this very fire to challenge us. And when brought to his knees, he relinquishes Marika's seal and unleashes the Abyssal Serpent, in the hopes of stopping us. You know who he reminds me a lot of? Lady Maria from Bloodborne, a boss whose real powers they hate, yet they will use it because what they hate more is seeing you win. Lady Maria was protecting something, Mesmer was defending something, ensuring his purge would be absolute, ensuring his loyalty to Queen Marika. I love it when a boss's lore is, again, incorporated into their fight. It's not that the other bosses don't do this, but it's not as effective as Mesmer's. His main powers are a curse that he hates using. It makes Mesmer more complex than most, if not all, bosses on this list. Not to mention, the fight itself is great! Again, it's perfectly balanced. He was insanely difficult for sure, but what I love about this game is mastering what was once difficult. There's a lot of bosses in this game that even when you do master it, they're still kind of annoying to deal with. With Mesmer, rotation, positioning, it is so crucial to the fight, and once you understand that, he can be a pushover. I've beaten this guy before plenty of times without taking a single hit, and I love that. The serpents are really cool. The entire arena is dark, mysterious, and I love that. I mean, his area is called Shadowkeep, so that kind of makes sense. And to be fair, a dragon-like form wouldn't be necessarily unique, because we've fought dragons before. I don't think we fought someone with snake-like powers. So you know what? It's really not that big of a deal for me. But I will never forget the impact he had on me on my first playthrough. Definitely one of my favorite bosses, perhaps of all time. Throughout Midra's manse, you'll hear the screams of an old man imprisoned within his own chambers. His agony echoes around the area until you finally reach Midra. At first, he doesn't seem like much. I mean, someone already started the fight for us. That sword is puncturing most of his vital organs. He curses you for disturbing his sentence, inflicting you with a frenzy. He's easily vanquished, but you know this is a FromSoft game, right? This is just the beginning. What follows is one of my favorite cutscenes in the entire game. Midra unleashes his frenzied flame in full by decapitating himself with the sword he was executed with. That's freaking cool, dude. Like, I don't know what else to say. What unveils is a false Lord of Frenzy. The tone immediately changes into this horrific scene. Midra is, in my eyes, the best boss in terms of setting the tone and atmosphere. The whole fight feels ethereal. Midra will use the frenzied flame in an erratic manner. He'll charge you with slow, ghostly windups, or he'll grace you with his own punishment by stabbing you the same way the Hornset did him. Once enough damage is dealt, he'll shower the entire chamber with the frenzied flame, adding an eerie glow to the whole room. The lighting, his demeanor, the music, his animations, it is all perfect. Gameplay aside, Midra does everything else at an A+ score. Ironically, the only thing holding him back is his difficulty. Like, on a first playthrough, he was one of the most difficult bosses in the game, but after a while, I kinda got used to it. Because of his human stature, he's easy to stagger, and I mean really easy. I did a challenge run with only Dragon Communion incantations. They're not that great, but against Midra, it was way easier than expected. Even his opener has an opening. You can rotate around him and deal significant damage before he's finished. It is a shame that he's quite easy now, like more so than the other bosses, even when compared to the base game bosses. Because here's the thing, if he was really difficult in a good way, he would definitely be the #1 spot. But that belongs to a much more famous boss, one that you probably know at this point. For the first time in FromSoft history, at least for me, the DLC did not provide the peak of boss design in the entire game. You can call me crazy, you can leave a dislike or an angry comment, but I think Melenia is still the best boss in Elden Ring. The amount of uproar this boss caused alone has been more prominent than any other boss I think I've faced ever. She united the fandom in one way or another. It was completely split. You were either on team she's fair and balanced, or she's garbage boss design and needs to be nerfed. There is also that niche group of people who made fan art that I cannot show here, but that kinda comes with the turf here. She is the pinnacle of difficulty. Healing per hit, insane combos, super armor, the waterfowl dance, Scarlet Rot, the waterfowl dance, I could go on. I absolutely adore it because, as difficult as she is, I have perfectly mastered this fight. Redon and Miquella are a close second, but in my opinion, Melenia without question was the more difficult boss when looking at all of their features. When it comes to finding openings, I learned about spacing. Depending on my weapon, I can evade her combos and strike when she's resting in between, or even mid-combo if I timed it correctly. Because of her human stature, you can cheese her in the most hilarious ways possible. Even with that, she still manages to destroy anyone in mere seconds if you're not careful. These games are known for their difficulty, but what I don't think is mentioned as much is overcoming those obstacles. This is why I love these games. Much like Redon and Mikola, she was a boss that was arguably too quick for Elden Ring's gameplay mechanics. This isn't new, by the way. Sister Fried from Dark Souls 3 had Bloodborne levels of aggression, and people noticed that. Even Manus from Dark Souls 1 had the mobility of a Dark Souls 3 boss. Melenia is simply keeping the trend alive here, and I think she's completely fair. Melenia is a boss that I'll remember for a long time. She not only demonstrates Elden Ring's peak boss design, but modern games' standard of difficulty. She's essentially marked a line between difficult bosses now and difficult bosses in the past, which actually would be a really interesting topic on its own. Without question, due to her reputation and gameplay, Melenia is my favorite boss in Elden Ring. Although, that's just what I think. I would love to hear your own list in the comment section down below, and yeah, I'm trying to get a randomizer going, but it's not really working, so I'll have to figure that out. But for now, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like and to subscribe for more content like this. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone, and of course, stay safe.